For the first time in a long time, it's beginning to feel like baseball is back in Kansas City. We'll dive into it in this edition of Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. And you can also catch us on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener and want to know a little bit more about me and this show, well, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, co-hosting, and some producing. So I stay pretty busy on the day-to-day in the sports world. But when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you're getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball, Monday through Friday. Most of the time, we do not miss a day, but if we do, we try to always bring you 2 episodes the following day. But shouldn't have any issues this week, no hangups, even with a short work week with 4th of July and having Friday off. Maybe not all of you have Friday off. I'll have Friday off this coming week, but I'll be bringing you episodes on Thursday and Friday, probably in the morning time so that I can get into the festivities and be able to take some time off later on in the day. But not to worry, no schedule changes this week as we gear up for another jam-packed baseball slate for the Royals. I know they were off tonight, so that gave me the flexibility to do this episode really when I wanted to. But they'll also be off the following Monday, but the rest of the week, they'll be playing against the Tampa Bay Rays, and they'll take a trip to Denver to take on the Colorado Rockies. However, I want to rewind from this past weekend and arguably the biggest series of the year against the Cleveland Guardians. We had mentioned it on Thursday and Friday of last week that it felt like this was the last opportunity for the Royals to gain some serious ground on Cleveland. And not that the season was going to end if they didn't. They still would have had a really good chance to make a push at the wild card. But for the central race, it was very important the Royals found a way to take that series. And it is one of the toughest things to do in baseball, to take 3 of 4 from any team in any location. You know, of course, I think a 4-game sweep would be the hardest thing to do, but taking 3 of 4 against a team like that, that's incredibly difficult with the way the Guardians had been playing and the way the pressure had really been mounting leading up to that series of this Royals team that was slumping. They couldn't really avoid getting their butts kicked in Arlington. They couldn't avoid a bad showing in Oakland. They were okay against Miami. That Marlins team was just really bad, and they found a way to take 2 of 3. This was the test, though. This was something that was put in front of them, and they were either going to be shown up by their division rival or they were going to surprise some people, and the latter happened in this. And what I wanted to really highlight about this series, not so much of what we saw on the field. We'll have time to talk about that throughout today's episode and maybe even in tomorrow's episode a little bit. But I was there for Sunday's game, 3rd largest crowd of the year. I watched the other 3 games from start to finish, of course, as I usually do, and the crowds were phenomenal. There were big crowds all weekend long. You had some giveaways. You had the Bo Jackson Hall of Fame induction. So there were some moments that drove fans to Kauffman Stadium. I will say, though, that it feels like this is the 2nd or 3rd homestand in a row where they are drawing some pretty substantial crowds and not completely for giveaways or for, fundraising things and charity events or concerts after the game. It's because this team is in a playoff race. It's because it's deep enough now into the season where these games are vitally important. You don't look at their schedule now and say, well, they're only 40 games through, or, well, they're only 50 games through. They are over the halfway point, and they hold a wild card spot, and they're also chasing a division still, being 7 games back. And I remember this vividly last year that I was out at Kauffman Stadium covering a game, and I want to say it was against Detroit, and the Royals had lost in extra innings, And it was a Monday game or a Tuesday game, something like that. Beginning of the week, the crowd wasn't going to be that big, but there was a very vocal minority crowd there. You could talk about maybe 12 or 13,000 being there. The Royals were completely out of it. I want to say it was in June. Can't quite recall that. I remember it vividly. I remember the game itself. I can't remember what a day it actually fell on in terms of the month. I remember it was early in the week. I remember it was the Tigers. I remember it was extra innings. And the Royals were not playing for anything. The Royals were nowhere near contention, but it was one of those games that you could tell the fan base was fired up for. In this specific game, it was back and forth. The Royals had trailed big early on, had found a way to make a comeback. And then in the end, Scott Barlow imploded in extra innings and the Tigers ran away with it. But, a lot of Royals fans felt like at the time they were not far off from Detroit. So why was Detroit experiencing this early season success? What were they doing that the Royals were not? And as I was leaving the ballpark, there was some angry and frustrated fans, maybe about a decision that was made by Matt Quatrero, but mainly I think about the dark cloud over the stadium, that it had been so long since meaningful baseball was played there. And there were moments last year where it got exciting, but when you looked at the schedule or you looked at the standings, it didn't really matter in the long run. There were great games that you were glad you went out to, but it was not very symbolic of baseball returning to Kansas City. There were moments you were proud as a fan of being 40 games under 500 and they could draw a big crowd on the Friday night, but it was usually because of the fireworks or because of the opponent or they were giving away something. This year has felt different. And I'm starting to see this turn. I'm starting to see this trend. And I was asked about this, last month or two. It was around that time of when do you think the fans are going to finally start buying in? When is it okay to start buying in? And I said back then, there's no harm to me in believing your team can go far. If you get hurt by it, either you've never been hurt before in sports or you just don't care enough. That's why I said back then when they'd started the season 6 games over 500 or they were 34-19, believe if you want to, but I'm not going to be the gatekeeper of this organization and say you have to buy in now if you're going to enjoy a playoff run. I just have experienced sport heartache before that it's never really felt different whether I believed it or not, of how far that team could go. And I think we're starting to see now a lot of the fan turnout be supportive of the team, not so much of what's going on around it, of the promotions, of who's in town. This was a big series. The fans knew it was a big series, and they showed up all week long. And I expect there to be some decent-sized crowd against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is not a team that jumps off the page. They don't have a large following. There's going to be a lot of Royals fans, though, and I could see somewhere between 18 and 20,000 early in the week, and that might not sound like a lot. But the last couple of years on July 1st, July 2nd, that draw may have been in the low teens, might have been 12,000 or 13,000. And though that's only a 5,000 to 7,000 jump, I think it's pretty substantial. I think it's quite the jump for a team in just 1 year. And it's this rewarding feeling of knowing that it matters now. We're July 1st. We're nearing the second half of the season, and the Royals are going to be in a playoff hunt. I do not believe they're going to bottom out. And this series was a big reason as to why. I think they can hang and swing with some of the biggest alphas in the division. I think they can hang around with some of the top dogs, some of the heavy hitters in the American League. And it may not result in a playoff series win. It may not result in a deep playoff run. But all we've been asking for a long time now was for this type of baseball to return. Give me a reason to show up to the ballpark in July, in August, in September. And back in 2014, there was this great article done on Sports Illustrated. I want to say I'm already blanking on the name of who the author was, so I apologize. But I think you can picture what the article looked like. It was the cover of Sports Illustrated. It was Billy Butler, after he hit a home run, he's pointing to the dugout. You can see the crowd, reacting to it. And the caption was, for the first time in nearly 30 years, baseball is going to matter. September is going to matter in Kansas City. And it kind of sent these chills, down your body of, wow, this is a surreal moment of it's actually back. It's real. It's going to matter. We're not worrying about maybe preseason football or training camp. And I'm a huge football fan, but to have this feeling of the Royals are going to be in it, the Royals are going to be here for July and August and September and trying to make a push for the playoffs, it makes you feel like baseball is back. Maybe just for 1 year. I can't tell you right now they're going to be as good or better next year, but at least for 2024, it feels like baseball is back in Kansas City. And that is a surreal feeling. I felt that on Sunday. The big crowd, the noise, the anxiousness in that crowd of knowing how big each game is, how big each pitch is. It's an exhilarating feeling to have, and one that we haven't felt for quite some time now. And though it's only been 9 years since playoff baseball, it's felt like decades and decades. Maybe not as long as the 29-year drought, but 9 years is a long time to just have a winning record. And the Royals, they're pacing for that right now. And tomorrow they'll try to continue their impressive homestand, and hopefully a lot more fans continue to show up as they try to make the playoffs for the first time since 2015. Okay, let's take our first break of the show. When we come back, Vinnie Pasquantino has been red hot. But I remember not too long ago, there were some people out there that were starting to doubt him being an everyday first baseman. Do I believe this is just a flash in the pan, or if this really is the real Vinnie Pasquantino? We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can always follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to tell you about a few of our sponsors today, starting with PrizePicks. And with PrizePicks, it's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. And it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community. You can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks, and you can turn $10 into $1,000. If you're looking for promotions, PrizePicks has got you covered every week, from lowering select player stats projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit, or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. And PrizePicks is available in more than 30 states across the country. So download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's Locked On MLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. Also want to let you know about Tax Network USA. Here at Locked On Royals, we pride ourselves on getting you the latest for your team, whether it's the offseason, the draft, spring training, or the playoffs. It's going to be year-round. You know what else is year-round? Collection season. Just because tax season is over doesn't mean the IRS will stop from coming for you for your unfiled taxes. The IRS can garnish your wages, levy your bank accounts, and even seize your property. Don't let the IRS target you. Let the licensed professionals and tax experts at Tax Network USA go to bat for you. With over 14 years of experience and an A-plus rating by the Better Business Bureau, Tax Network USA has saved their clients over $1 billion in tax debt. Whether you owe taxes, have complicated matters that require tax planning, or finally hit that parlay this season and need help correctly filing, call 1-800-549-1000 or visit tnusa.com/locked-on. And if you mention Locked On at checkout, you'll receive a $250 discount off their services at Tax Network USA. I go back to the road trip, and I go back to when Vinnie Pasquantino didn't snag that ball that was on a pickoff play by Will Smith at Dodger Stadium. And there was some debate going on among my followers of Vinnie Pasquantino being a below average defender, and he wasn't good enough to be playing first base every single day, and the numbers weren't that great. And at the time, I couldn't really dispute that the overall numbers were not eye-popping. And I think part of it is my fault. Part of it is maybe the Royals Twitter fan base that fell in love with Vinny early on in the year. From his days in the minor leagues, the way he would just tear up AA and AAA pitching. When he got to the big leagues, the numbers really translated. All the advanced metrics supported him. But the glaring thing was, honestly, the durability. Vinny couldn't stay healthy. And so you couldn't really stay that the track record was going to be successful. I mean, you had small snippets. You had 60 game sample sizes or 82 game sample sizes, but not 162. His rookie year got cut short because of injury. That was his best statistical season. Last year, and a meaningless year for the Royals, record-wise, his season was cut short. Didn't really get a chance to have that true evaluation. And this year, it kind of was weird because he would have these slumps that stretched over 10 to 15 games, and then he'd really catch fire. And that is what's happening right now. He's starting to catch fire again. But even his numbers on the year are not bad. And why I thought the overreaction at the time was a little bit premature. And maybe it was because of the expectations we put on Vinnie Pasquantino. I know I did. I had a podcast episode saying he was going to make the All-Star game. That likely is not going to happen at this point, barring any unforeseen changes. But we know when the voting closes on Wednesday, he is not going to be an All-Star representative. So I did miss on that. But as I said, I admit when I'm wrong. I admit when I jumped the gun. And I had very high expectations for Vinnie Pasquantino. But this year, I do not think has been bad for a single season standpoint and what you want from your first baseman. The numbers I'm looking at right now would tell you a very good story. And that's, you go back to May 1st, Vinny slashing 268, 327, 463 with a 790 OPS, 23 extra base hits, and 41 RBIs. He is leading the team in RBIs right now. He's pacing to have right around or over 100 RBIs. And then for the advanced metrics here, his expected batting average is 265, so maybe a little bit on the unlucky side. His expected on-base percentage is 348. His batting run value is 7. His fielding run value is 2. He is in the 83rd percentile in outs above average. So for the below average stats defensively, he's actually got great range. He is in the 93rd percentile in strikeout rate, the 95th percentile in whiff rate, the 80th percentile in hard hit rate, the 83rd percentile in average exit velocity, 78th percentile in expected slug. And the only spot that I think that he struggles the most at, which per these metrics would be running the bases, arm strength, and his launch angle sweet spot. Those are all below the 50 percentile mark there. But across the board, there are numerous categories that make you feel good about where he's at. That though the average may be in the 240s, there's those underlying metrics that show, hey, he's been an above league average hitter. And that is the case. His WRC plus is north of league average. Since May 1st, he's been what you needed him to be. Maybe you want that on-base percentage to be a little bit higher. I'd hope for it to be in the 340s. It can get there, though. He's red hot right now, was incredibly hot against Cleveland's pitching staff. But I think that this is closer to who he is than those 0 for 15 stretches or those 2 for 28 stretches. I don't think that is Vinnie Pasquantino because of the fact that he's got a little bit of bad ball luck there. He doesn't strike out at all. He doesn't whiff at a lot of pitches. And when you don't whiff, you don't strike out, you got a decent walk rate, you're not going to have too many 2 for 28 stretches. I would have loved to see more of the power, but we're kind of seeing that power turn on a little bit, and that could be huge for the second half. It just feels like this is that piece they need in the lineup, at the top half at least, to really become one of their most productive hitters. I mean, truly, I thought Vinny had the most professional approach going into the year. I thought he had a great swing. I thought he hit the ball really hard, high walk rate, low K rate. He gets on base a lot. He was very much not what the Royals had for years at first base, or just from the DH spot or in a run-producing spot. I never thought that the Royals would have a player in their lineup that valued the walk as much as Vinnie Pasquantino did. But this year, we did see stretches where the walk rate wasn't there. He was chasing a lot. He was popping up a lot. He was rolling over to second. Now I think we're starting to see the real version of him, and that could be huge for the second half. We've seen a couple of guys catch fire, and I thought in this Cleveland series there was nobody hotter than Vinnie Pasquantino. If he carries that into the Tampa series and into the All-Star break, I would expect a pretty good second half from the Royals first baseman. Now, he's not the only first baseman or Royals hitter, in fact, that has caught fire since the beginning of May. The other one has been Hunter Renfroe. And despite that injury he had to his toe, he's still been one of the hottest Royals hitters in the last 2 months. Do we believe that this is the real version of Hunter Renfroe, or like Vinnie Pasquantino's bad slumps, is it kind of a flash in the pan? We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. But before we do that, I want to tell you about Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, is this the real Hunter Renfroe? We'll dive into it next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15 and find us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, we're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Want to tell you about our final sponsor today in FanDuel. I love sports, and I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have officially come to an end, and we have no more games to watch on the NBA side, it just doesn't feel the exact same when I am placing some bets over on FanDuel. And as they like to say, the sports aren't sportsing like we all want them to. But FanDuel keeps the sports going whenever I want it to. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is looking to hook up all their customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. So don't waste your time. Head over to FanDuel today, create an account, and start winning some money. Along with Vinnie Pasquantino, one of the guys that has provided some real big-time pop in the middle of that order has been Hunter Renfroe. And Hunter Renfroe is somebody that I was not always high on. I was not always a believer in. I thought that the Royals would get rid of Hunter Renfroe before they would get rid of Kyle Isbell or MJ Melendez. And now I'm very much glad the Royals never gave up on Hunter Renfroe. And they believed that this type of surge was going to be coming. This was a reason they gave him a 2-year deal. And it's not to say that Hunter Renfroe is this team's best hitter, or he is the number 4 hitter, or he is going to be just a force to be reckoned with come playoff time. But it's hard to deny what he's been able to do in the last 2 months or so. In fact, 2 months exactly. And like I read off those Vinny stats, I want to read off a couple stats for you here involving Hunter Renfroe. So since May 1st, we went back with May 1st with Vinnie Pasquantino. And for Hunter Renfroe, you can go back the same amount of time, but he missed a little bit of it with that toe injury, having the bad bone bruise on his toe that we once thought was fractured. And thank goodness it wasn't fractured, because missing him in the lineup was a lot worse than I thought it would be. But since May 1st, and that stretches, I believe, over 40-ish games. I think actually 30 games now that I think about it. Yeah, it's 30 games here. I have it in front of it. So 30 games he's played in since May 1st. He is slashing 287, 368, 532, 900 OPS for that, to add that all up. And since May 1st, his OBP is 341. So let me go back and correct that stat there, because I read it off incorrectly. It's from my own tweet too. So talk about screwing that up. His last 30 games, that was the triple slash of 287, 368, 532. Since May 1st, his OBP is 341. So something you would absolutely take with Hunter Renfroe 10 times over. Now, in 15 games in June, which has now come to a close, so he played half the month, his WRC plus was 197. So 97 points higher than the league average, and nearly had a 10% walk rate. So that's what you've gotten from Hunter Renfroe. Basically good offense since May 1st. Better than good offense. He's been one of the team's better hitters since the beginning of May. And though he missed a little bit of time there, you are starting to see why that belief didn't go away from the Royals. And, you know, it does feel like in times of desperation, when you have somebody struggling, it's so easy for us as fans to point the finger and say, well, that's the easy fix. Just get rid of that guy. And Hunter Renfroe wasn't doing himself any favors at the beginning of the year. To be hitting 140 every single night, to look up there and the power numbers aren't there, you aren't hitting the ball well, you're striking out a lot, he was not giving you much confidence. There was not many people that, at least I thought, were going to believe in a turnaround. However, the Royals invested money into him. They invested multiple years into Hunter Renfroe. And that isn't to say that he stays around next year. Maybe, they trade him in the offseason, or maybe they just eat their money and outright him next year. Just, cut him from the roster, remove him from the 40-man, and you go from there. But it is undeniable for this offense that the ceiling of it, the best potential of it, it includes Hunter Renfroe. And that was a sentence I did not envision saying back in May, or maybe the ending part of April, because as I said, those numbers started to move up in May. But it took a while to notice those numbers trending in a positive direction. But the biggest question becomes, is this the real Hunter Renfroe? Is this just a good 2-month stretch? Is he just a guy that's catching fire because the weather's getting warmer? Is he just a guy that is seemingly gotten lucky against some bad pitching? What could it truly be? And I think it is somewhere in between. I definitely did not think Hunter Renfroe was as bad as 140. I don't think he's as good as a 197 WRC plus over a 15-game sample size, but you get somewhere in the middle, and he gets to 220 with his batting average, and he gets to, let's say, 310, 315 with his OBP. He runs into 20 home runs this year. He drives in between 55 and 70 runs. I think that's worthwhile for Hunter Renfroe, and I think that would still be a really good bat for the 6-hole or the 7-hole for Kansas City. And for a lot of these guys that have the potential, we just haven't seen it, or the bounce back ability, it's great to see it right now. Remember, we go back a few months ago that these outfielders couldn't do anything for the Royals. They could not provide you a lick of production. Kyle Isbell hit over 300 in the month of June. We just told you what Hunter Renfroe's numbers were in the month of June. And MJ Melendez has had his best stretch since the beginning of April in the month of June. So now 3 of your outfielders are clicking a little bit more. You are getting Salvador Perez back on track a little bit. He's hitting near 300 in his last 7 games. Bobby Witt Jr. has gotten out of his slump. Yeah, Maikel Garcia is not really there, but Vinny has gotten out of his slump. Michael Massey's back in this lineup. You are starting to put the pieces back to this roster that were all kind of out of place for a little bit of time. Not having Michael Massey was huge. Not having Michael Wacha was huge. Not having Hunter Renfroe was huge for this team, because at the end of the day, the best version of the Royals includes all 3 of those guys. And for Hunter Renfroe, I think he is somebody right now I want up at the plate with runners in scoring position. I think he's one of those bats I trust in a spot at this point in time. I don't know if they keep him down in the 7-hole, the 8-hole, the 6-hole. He is still limping a little bit. When I was at the game the other day and he had a double down the left field line, he's really kind of hobbling into second base. Good thing is the bone bruise. It's not a hamstring injury or a groin injury where that can flare back up in a bad way. I think he's just playing on a bad toe, and hopefully that pain goes away sooner rather than later. Right now, though, it's not affecting his bat. He seems to have picked up where he left off. Is he the real version of himself? Hopefully close to it, but I'm going to say it's right there in the middle. Nonetheless, it's better than what they were getting from Hunter Renfroe in the month of April, which was one of the league's worst hitters in terms of batting average. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. One last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. Tomorrow, we're going to preview a little bit of this Rays series, dive into some of Brady Singer's numbers, and if we feel like he is somebody in the second half you can count on, and maybe some more trade deadline talk. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.